Hey, bro, do you mind just, helping me with this one little small thing? Hey, do you mind helping me with this? And you're not compensating the person. So now that person is giving you their time and no compensation. And maybe they have other things that they have to get done and that are actually paying them. Welcome to the Park Car Conversation. I am your host, Jay Lucci, and today we are at episode 20. To commemorate episode 20, because that's kind of like a big deal, I'm going to talk about something, as we do in every episode, that is very vulnerable. Sometimes it's hard to digest, it's hard to hear, and sometimes the truth hurts. Today we're going to be talking about boundaries. This episode is one for me and it's one for you. And it's also one for somebody that you know. So I'm going to need you to send this episode to somebody else because people need to hear this. People who don't understand their boundaries, and sometimes I found myself in that position, oftentimes hurt people along the way. You're not respectful about how they feel. And there's also people in the world who are opportunists. Let's say it with me. Opportunists. Those people are not mindful of what other people's personal boundaries may be. We all have limits and we all have people and sometimes experiences that go over and exceed our limits. Where do you respect your own boundaries so that you know where to draw the line? Because at the end of the day, it is absolutely necessary and healthy for you to set boundaries in your life. And a lot of the times when people are exceeding your limits and they're exceeding and going over your boundaries, it might be because you haven't express that to them. You haven't let them know what your boundaries are. And sometimes that's because we've never addressed those boundaries for yourself. So today I'm going to talk about different types of boundaries that you need to be aware of. The first boundary we're going to speak about is emotional boundaries. Understanding your emotional boundaries means that you respect and understand your emotions and your feelings for yourself and also for others. And that's a hard thing to do sometimes when people are selfish. And I've been there before. I'm sure a lot of you have been there before, where you're just selfish and you don't think about the emotional boundaries that you cross with others. What I want you to do is to think about what are your emotional boundaries. How much can you personally take on? And everybody has different measures of what you can emotionally intake. Some examples of emotional boundaries might look like this. I know that you're having a hard time right now, but at the moment, I personally just can't take it on. It's a lot for me. Is it okay if we revisit this conversation at a different time? There's a lot of people who go through a lot of things. And so sometimes these people might just open up and, what they call emotionally dump these things on you. Emotionally dumping is when you just let it off. You say everything's on your chest, maybe everything's on in your life, the problems you have. Sometimes someone will share these things with someone because they care a lot for them. They feel comfortable around them. But at the end of the day, now we're talking about a boundary. So you have to see where that person's at. You have to ask, is it okay if I share some things about my personal life that are going on with you? Is it a good time to, right? Because sometimes when someone just emotionally dumps all of their problems, you could be going through so much things on your own, and now you have to think, if you're an empathetic person, you feel their feelings and emotions, all of a sudden now you're taking all of that on. So that can be very hard for people. When we talk about emotionally dumping, it's also something that is passed on through generations. It might be parents dumping emotional things on their children that they shouldn't have to be exposed to. I've seen that a lot, where I've seen parents talk about just about everything, and they think, for the most part, their children are open, they're aware of everything, but there's some things that children don't need to hear. So emotionally dumping everything. Emotionally dumping is also understanding that there's people around you. There's some people that might not be comfortable with talking about these topics, and those are triggers for other people. So be mindful when you're having conversations, because it can emotionally hurt somebody who hears unintentionally. And I'm not saying that person's listening in. They just might be in the same vicinity where it's loud enough where they can hear this conversation. So please be aware of emotional boundaries with people. People's feelings and emotions on their mind is the most powerful thing you have. So that can be really destructive if it's not thought about. The second boundary, and this is something that y'all cannot cross, okay? The second boundary is physical boundaries. It is okay to tell people that they need to be mindful of your personal space. Look at the time that we're in right now. I mean, now it's COVID. We have to stay 6 feet apart. It's the kind of same thing. If you need space from somebody, hey, is it okay if you stand a little bit further back? I'm not comfortable with you standing so close to me. Physical boundaries also means that you are asking for space. You are just asking for space from somebody. For example, if you and somebody are in the same vicinity all the time, you might live together, you might, have close friendships where you see each other often. But if you require some space, whether that be for sleeping, eating, resting, because you've had a long week at work, sometimes it's okay for people to need a physical space to be by themselves, to regroup, to recharge. And so for someone that doesn't understand physical boundaries, they're going to constantly hound you, or they're going to constantly demand your time when you don't have to give them your time. I found something for me right now, even just in my own life, in my, the last 2 years with my son, I find myself a lot of the time having to say, at the moment, I'm really busy with a lot of things. I need to spend more time with Z doing certain activities, and on my free time, that's what I'm really focused on. Right now, I can't be present, but eventually and hopefully soon we can meet up and we can talk and we can, hang out, and that's okay. And I just hope that people respect that. That's a boundary of mine, because I need that time for myself, for my son, for the things that I'm doing to require that space. So we've spoken about people's emotional boundaries, we've spoken about people's physical boundaries, and now let's talk about material boundaries. You are not obligated to lend, to give, to support people if that is not within your boundaries. People and a lot of opportunists are like this for material things, because that's the thing that glistens in their eye first. They see what you have and how they can get some of that. So for example, you asking to borrow money, right? It is okay for people to be like, at this time, I cannot lend you this money. I would be happy to help in another way possible. Another material boundaries is people assuming that the things that you have that they can borrow or they can use. For example, you cannot use my car right now. I am the only person on my insurance and I cannot take that risk. I'm not willing to do that, right? And a lot of people who are opportunists, I find, have a hard time understanding that, and they think that people are being selfish. But people have to make these boundaries for themselves, because could you imagine if people didn't? Then everything would be a free-for-all. You could say as much as you want emotionally to people. You could, take as much things from you want from people, and vice versa. You wouldn't want that happening to you. You have to understand that puts people in an uncomfortable place, and that's not a good thing. We need to work on doing that. The next boundary is time. Time boundaries. This is a very important boundary to recognize with yourself. You are not obligated to give anybody your time. Your time is completely and utterly yours. And so people need to also realize that if you're not willing to give them their time, and that could be because you have overcommitted, that is because maybe you are busy at the time, you're feeling overwhelmed, and right now your time has to be used on certain things, people need to respect that. And I think this is a big boundary that's always crossed in business, it's crossed in, relationships, it's crossed in friendships, it's crossed in the workplace. Some factors that you might start noticing when your time boundaries are being challenged is when you're talking to somebody and they talk and they extend the conversation for way longer than it's supposed to. A time boundary might be when someone asks you to help with a task and it was way longer than it was supposed to be. Time boundaries could also look like somebody contacting you when you say that you're unavailable to be contacted. It could be somebody demanding time with you when you don't necessarily have the time to give. When I mean that, and I mean people being upset that you cannot spend the time with them. So understanding your time boundaries, for someone like me, it means like right now I'm on a tight schedule. I have XYZ to do before I go to sleep, or after I put the baby to sleep, I have just enough time for me to get something done for myself, and then I cannot give you any more of my time. It is okay to be like, I cannot give you that time of my day. And people who don't respect time boundaries, I think these are they come across as some of the most disrespectful ones, because, what you ask for people of their time, and let's say you don't compensate them. A lot of professionals have time boundaries that they need to make sure people respect. And a lot of people just aren't mindful enough to respect their time boundaries. What that might look like. Hey, bro, can you just do that for me quick? A proper response for somebody who's asking and exceeding your time boundary might sound like this. Hey, right now, I would love to help, but I'd be overcommitting at that time. Like, I have too much things going on, but I would love to. Hopefully in the future, I can. Another example of how you could address this is professionals, is I would love to take that project on. My hourly rate is, And somebody has to respect that because that's your time. Even for me in my life, I find a lot of the time I have to be like, I cannot do that. I know to you it might seem like I need to get out and have a little bit more fun, motherhood and all those things. But right now at the time, I need to go home and I need to get this done, this done, this done. I need to go to sleep because I can't wake up the next day. I had a conversation with some moms the other day and it was so funny because we were all just like, if we don't get to sleep soon in the morning, we are going to be cranky. When that baby wakes up early o'clock and I've been up late at night, because I've done too much things, then it's not going to be a great day for me. The last boundary that we're going to talk about is intellectual boundaries. Intellectual boundaries is something that somebody has to be very aware of so that they can respect others. This is something that I struggled in because I never really thought and never sat down and was like, okay, this is what my boundaries are in terms of this. I found myself being very disrespectful to a lot of people when I was challenged, when I was in a disagreement. What this might look like, okay, for somebody who's, having a hard time with someone not understanding their intellectual boundary is like, you can say this: I understand that we're disagreeing right now, but I'm not going to let you speak to me like that. I'm not going to let you belittle me. I'm not going to let you call me stupid. I'm not going to let you say that what I said is stupid. We are just disagreeing. When people try to downplay people's intelligence, it could be that you are more experienced and you've had more, exposure to a certain topic. But that doesn't mean that you can call somebody stupid or say that what you just said is dumb. Respecting and understanding your intellectual boundary might be that you have to cut somebody off. You have to remove yourself somebody because this person makes me feel less of myself. They are constantly talking down to me. And there's a lot of people who, have trauma that's trickled down because they were spoken to that way, and then so they think that they can speak to others that way, like it's okay to be very rough. At the end of the day, I understand that there's a lot of people that might be like me. This is why I'm like this, or why I have been like this. It's because I'm so emotional. So when I'm put in a position where I'm confronted or I'm disagreeing with somebody, all of a sudden my emotions come before my logic, and this oftentimes leads to being disrespectful. I have definitely sucked at this. And guess what? At the end of the day, that sucks. It sucks. It's probably the worst thing that I've ever had to deal with in terms of, my personality traits. It's because I can get very disrespectful in an argument and it's not needed. That's so destructive. It's not nice. It doesn't matter if you disagree with somebody or you think about something different. You do not call them out of their name. You don't call them names. You don't talk down to them. And so this is something, if you grow up in a rough environment, people can say they're used to it. For them, like for someone like me, it's like, you could talk to me that way. It's not that big of a deal. Like I get over things fast, right? So you can call me something and I'm like, okay, like whatever. And other people aren't set up that way. So I had to personally be mindful of my respect for intellectual boundaries. So as we've spoken about boundaries, I just want to let you know that this is surface level boundaries. We could literally dictate and dedicate one episode of the Parkour Conversation for every boundary that we just spoke about, because it can go so in depth, it can go into so many dimensions, and it can go into so many different scenarios with different people. And so for you, if you're watching this video or you're listening to the audio, let's go through these boundaries. We have emotional boundaries. We have physical boundaries. We have material boundaries. We have time boundaries. And we also have intellectual boundaries. If you have not ever sat down with yourself, gone through every single one of those categories and defined what that looks like for you, do that. Write it down on a piece of paper, make a memo in your phone, text a friend and ask your friend, hey, what are your boundaries when it comes to that? Let it be known for yourself so that moving forward, you will know exactly what to tell people that they need to respect, where your limits are, and you need to also know what you can intake. The Parkour Conversation, episode 20, respect your boundaries.